At 17 on a bitter Thursday morning, my sister arrived at my apartment carrying the keys to my SUV and a secret she expected me to bury for her. The front headlight was smashed, the bumper was scraped, and a narrow streak of blood marked the hood. She looked at me and said she had hit someone, driven away, and needed me to tell the police I had been behind the wheel. Before I could even process what she had admitted, my mother came through the doorway and gripped my arms. She told me I simply needed to say I was driving. My father arrived minutes later with the same calm voice he used whenever he wanted something terrible to sound reasonable. He said my sister had a political campaign to protect, while I supposedly had nothing important enough to lose. What they did not know was that their old image of me was years out of date. They still thought I was the daughter who had disappointed everyone, walked away from the family plans, and disappeared into government work. 3 weeks earlier, I had taken an oath as a United States magistrate judge. I had spent years building a life they barely understood, and now they were asking me to risk it for a crime I had not committed. My sister Carolyn had always been the family favorite. At 33, she was campaigning for a seat on the Denver City Council, promising safer streets, honesty, and responsible leadership. Our mother, Diane, proudly introduced her at community events, while our father, Richard, used decades of political experience to shape her public image. Carolyn was their investment in the future. I was the daughter they preferred to describe as a cautionary tale. The irony was almost painful. They told people I had abandoned law school after a disagreement with Dad, but I had actually transferred, graduated, clerked for a federal judge, worked as an assistant United States attorney, and eventually earned my judicial appointment. I stopped correcting them because every conversation eventually became about Carolyn anyway. Still, when she asked to borrow my SUV that night because someone was following her campaign van, I gave her the keys. She had promised to return it before morning. Instead, she appeared at my door smelling of perfume, peppermint, and alcohol. When I asked what happened, she repeated that an icy road had caused her to strike a pedestrian. I asked whether she had called emergency services or stayed with the injured man. Her answer was no. She claimed she had slowed down, seen him move, and then panicked. That was when my parents entered the conversation. Dad immediately started constructing a story. He said the vehicle was registered to me, which made everything simple. I could tell police I had been driving, describe the collision as an accident, and let an attorney handle everything afterward. I stared at him because he had clearly thought this through before arriving. Mom kept asking everyone to lower their voices, worried that the neighbors might hear. Her concern was not the injured stranger, it was our family reputation. Then my phone received an alert. My SUV had automatically uploaded collision footage, interior audio, GPS information, and driving data. After a previous security threat connected to one of my cases, additional encrypted cameras had been installed in the vehicle. The system preserved everything after a serious impact. Carolyn had no idea it existed, and neither did my parents. I quietly turned the screen away while Dad continued explaining exactly how I should lie. They became more aggressive when I refused. Carolyn reminded me that I had once protected her after she damaged a rental property and used my name to cover the expenses. I admitted that I had lied for her before, but I told her that mistake had taught me something. One compromise can become permission for the next. She argued that I owed her because she had lived under family expectations while I had escaped. I realized she was not asking for help anymore, she was demanding sacrifice. Around 3 in the morning, Dad began assigning everyone their parts. Mom would tell the campaign manager that Carolyn had become sick after the donor event. Carolyn would remove messages about borrowing my SUV. Dad wanted me to claim I had been exhausted and thought I had struck something harmless before driving home. Then Mom asked whether I should report the vehicle stolen. I looked at all 3 of them and finally understood that they were no longer discussing a mistake, they were organizing a cover story. A security officer contacted me shortly afterward to confirm that the collision files had been preserved. I told him I was safe and instructed him to keep the evidence locked under the proper protocol. I did not tell my family what I knew. I wanted to see what they would do when they believed there was still a chance to destroy the truth. That decision became important when my mother received news that a nearby doorbell camera had captured part of the crash. Carolyn immediately changed her story again. She mentioned a man named Evan, then quickly claimed she had misspoken. I asked whether she had been alone, whether she had been using her phone, and whether she had been speeding. Her answers came too quickly, like lines she had rehearsed. Dad tried to stop my questions, but I had spent years listening to witnesses under pressure. People sometimes reveal more through the speed of their answers than through the words themselves. Carolyn was hiding someone. That person arrived before sunrise. Evan Cross was Carolyn's campaign manager, and he admitted he had been in the passenger seat. He claimed he had been helping her get home after she received a threatening message. He also admitted drinking earlier that evening. My father immediately tried to shut down the conversation, but Evan looked genuinely frightened when I mentioned coordinated false statements. For the first time, someone in that room seemed to understand how serious the situation had become. Carolyn then threatened me directly. She said that if I did not cooperate, she would tell police I had taken the SUV, become emotionally unstable, and caused the crash myself. My parents did not immediately reject the idea. That silence hurt more than her threat. I walked into my office and opened the door. Hanging behind it was my judicial robe. On the wall was my commission beneath the seal of the United States District Court. Their expressions changed when they finally understood who I had become. Carolyn stared at the photograph from my investiture ceremony and asked how long I had been a judge. I told her I had been appointed 3 months earlier and sworn in 3 weeks before that night. Dad recovered quickly and argued that my position meant I had influence and should use it to protect my family. I told him the exact opposite was true. My oath did not give me permission to erase wrongdoing. It required me to respect the truth even when the people involved shared my last name. I opened the vehicle security application and showed them the basic information. The SUV had recorded the collision, the route, the speed, the braking pattern, and conversations inside the vehicle. The original files were preserved on a secure system. Carolyn finally understood that blaming me would not erase what had already been recorded. I told them I had not forced anyone to lie, delete messages, invent timelines, or threaten me. They had made those choices themselves. Later that morning, we learned that the injured pedestrian was 61-year-old Samuel Ortiz, a maintenance supervisor walking home after icy roads disrupted public transportation. He had suffered a broken leg, fractured ribs, and a head injury. Doctors believed he would survive, but his long-term recovery was uncertain. While his family waited beside a hospital bed, my family was still discussing campaign numbers and headlines. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty about refusing to protect Carolyn. Carolyn hired an attorney, Rebecca Shaw, who immediately ordered everyone to stop discussing the incident and preserve their phones. Rebecca warned my parents that private family conversations could become evidence if investigators found proof of an organized cover-up. Even Dad finally realized that his political instincts were useless against physical evidence. I refused to interfere with the investigation and made it clear that my position would not be used to give Carolyn special treatment. Two detectives arrived later that morning. I gave them my statement, explained why Carolyn had borrowed my SUV, disclosed my position, and provided the proper security contact. I did not ask for professional courtesy. Then Detective Alvarez told me something that confirmed exactly how far my sister had gone. Carolyn had already contacted police and suggested that I might have taken the SUV after the reception. Even after learning there was evidence, she had tried to place me behind the wheel. My building records ultimately confirmed that I had been home, while investigators continued gathering the vehicle footage, camera recordings, and witness statements. My parents still asked me to soften my account because reporters were beginning to question the campaign. I told them there was nothing left for me to correct. The truth was already moving forward without my permission, and this time I would not step in front of it. By the end of that day, Carolyn faced the consequences of her own decisions. Evan had to answer for what he knew, and my parents could no longer pretend that loyalty meant protecting someone from accountability. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired, disappointed, and strangely relieved. For years, I had believed being a good daughter meant absorbing the damage other people caused. That night finally taught me something different. Loving your family